everyone, thanks again for checking out my channel. My guest today is Jacqueline. Jacqueline, thanks so much for being my guest. Maybe you could just start out by telling us a little bit about your faith background.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me. I'm excited to do it. Something that I've actually really in my faith come to realize in actually the last few weeks is the grace that I received in baptism, that I was baptized Catholic. And what a gift. That I have been Catholic my whole life. It's been kind of this deeper understanding of my identity in Christ, that I was given that grace as a child without of any of my own works or doings, that I was gifted with that grace. But within that, my faith at home wasn't very Catholic. It wasn't, a huge part of my life growing up. And I actually even received First Communion, though I never went to any classes for it.
Oh,
we were homeschool, so we got the books taken home, but we never actually did them.
Okay.
But then we received First Communion, but then we weren't going to church. It's this kind of Catholic, but very much not in reality upbringing. But again, what a grace, what a gift that I had that as a child. And so we would go to Mass, maybe for Christmas and Easter as a kid, but by the time I was 7 or 8, we pretty much weren't going to church anymore.
Gotcha.
But I had an aunt, my mom's sister, who's to this day a super strong Christian, Evangelical Christian, and so she would send us Bibles or Max Lucado books or little devotionals for girls and things like that. And again, what a gift of grace that in my childhood I had these little hints of God. And as kids, we know. And I remember that feeling of being a kid and desiring to know God and desiring to read these books. Not that I did it with any regularity, but there's just something that was really beautiful and really appealing about it to me as a kid. And so, I can kind of point to those two things, as there were these stirrings in my heart as a kid, even if it wasn't imaged at home, that I just felt this draw to God, but I didn't know what to do with that. So that was kind of my upbringing.
Gotcha, but you believed in God?
I think so. I wanted there to be a God. But I think something else that I had recognized in my childhood and through my teenage years is this doubt. I wanted there to be God, but I remember actually vocalizing this, I just don't think I'm ever going to know. I don't think I've been given the gift of faith, and I'm not going to know. But I wanted there to be a God. And I feel like that very much is that first, 16 years or so, even of my life, of just wanting there to be, but not knowing what to do with that want.
Yeah. Would growing up, say at school, did you say you were homeschooled, or that was just
I went to public school.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah,
that was just the catechism or the First Communion.
Right. Yes. Yeah. I never went to a parish CCD class or whatever. Yeah. Yeah.
Gotcha. So then, when you were at school, did you view yourself as a Catholic, or was it not really a part of your identity? It was just a very
no, I don't think so. However, I have this wonderful friend who's still a great friend of mine. Her name's Abigail. She grew up in the classic Catholic household with all the siblings and all of that. And she started going to public school in 2nd grade. And I remember that she would hit us on the forehead if we said, "Oh my God."
Oh.
And so I had this force also at school that was very Catholic. She knew her Father in heaven, and she wanted her friends to know her Father. To this day, has that just strength in her. How she lives. It's just very clear, her love of God. And so I think through having that kind of friend, I again had this, I want to be like her. I want to have this strength of faith that she has, but I just don't have it. And so I can't remember ever telling my friends I was Catholic or saying I was a Christian or whatnot.
Okay.
But I think there was still that place in school through her and through her friendship that kind of fed into that desire. But again, it was at the same time, she had this faith that I just didn't have and didn't know what to do with.
Okay, so then you said around 16, maybe things started to change a little bit. So what happened as you kind of finished up high school and became an adult?
Yeah, so 16 was that summer. My second cousins are really strong Baptists, and one of them runs a summer camp out in Minnesota. And he was looking for counselors, and I was like, well, that sounds fun. I've never traveled that far away. I would love to do that. And so I went out there for 2 weeks, and that was the first time that it was a Bible camp. So Protestant, Baptist, non-denominational. I don't really know exactly what they aligned with, but and that was the first time I was with the other counselors, and they were reading the Bible and doing devotions and praying, and that was the first time I saw that Christian worship. And again, I loved it. Like, it was what that longing in my heart was like, was seeking all that time. And there's just this joy and this like vibrancy in life that I really loved. And then that same summer, I went to a work camp through the Congregational Church with some of my friends. And when I was there, I had these incredible encounters with the team I was working with. We were painting this lady's house, and she had just finished cancer treatment. And we were like scraping and painting her house all weekend. And I remember one day we were like up on a ladder, like, you know, painting, and we just started talking about faith. And I shared a little bit about the camp experience that I had and whatever. And the next day I have type 1 diabetes, which I've also in this story is such a gift of grace of like having suffering as such a little kid. I was 5 when I was diagnosed. I think that was part of this longing of like, there's got to be more to life. Like, if I've been given this suffering, like, what am I going to do with this suffering?
Wow.
There's got to be a point to it. And so then the next day I had a really low blood sugar, and that kind of hurts my mental health, I guess. Like, it does a lot to the body. And I remember that day, like, thinking, like, basically, like, no one likes me, like, I'm annoying, you know, whatever sort of thoughts go into your head. So I spent the day inside with the women, and we had this incredible conversation about suffering and how she had cancer and I had diabetes, and we didn't understand each other's struggles, but there's a grace in them. And I was like, oh, these words are coming out of me that I don't really know and don't understand. And then at the end of the week, one of the girls that was in my group pulled me aside, and she was like, what you said to me that day when we were just up on a ladder, like, really inspired me. Like, I'm going to take my faith more seriously. Like, I'm going to start going back to church. And I'm like, oh, like, I don't even go to church. Like, I don't really know where that's come from. But it was the first time that I felt the Lord use me for his will, his story, and seeking his children. And so I was like, oh, like, you know, maybe you are there. I also had this that was the first time I prayed that week too. I had this, like, in that like low blood sugar kind of suffering moment, I kind of offered that for the first time, not really knowing what I was doing. And I heard the Lord actually speak over me, his love for me. And so that week was that stirring, that like the Lord kind of beginning to pursue me and being like, no, I'm real and I want you to know that. But then I like went back to my public school and, you know, did the rest of high school, enjoyed it, you know, whatever, and didn't really know what to do with it.
It sounds like a seed was kind of planted there.
Absolutely. And that fed into the college seeking process. Like, at that point I was definitely very curious about Christianity. And so I was open to going to a Christian school. I knew I wanted to go far from home. And I went to all these tours, and I just didn't like any of the schools. And I toured Liberty, and I decided I wasn't going to go there. And it was fine, but one of my friends was like, well, look at it again. Like, they have this scholarship that, like, you fit. Like, it could be good. And so I applied. I got the scholarship, and I was like, you know what? Like, I'll just go here. If I hate it, it's, like, basically for a year of college. I can go somewhere else. So that's kind of how I ended up at Liberty. And knowing that it was a Christian school, but again, like, I had no idea that faith could be so important to people. Like, other than Abigail, like, I hadn't had that really. I had never seen that.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So I was like, okay, it's a Christian school, like, cool. But, like, no idea what I was about to walk into.
Yeah. Because, like, at Liberty, don't they have, like, the daily kind of, I don't know if it's called chapel or something.
Yeah, it's
like
twice a week. They have
okay,
convocation.
Okay.
And it's, it used to be 3 times a week. Now it's twice a week. I think it's still twice a week. And it's all, 12, 15,000 students who are on campus go to the basketball arena, and there's like, worship music, and then someone comes and does a talk, and sometimes it's like a pastor or something, but often it will be maybe someone who's Christian who's in the workforce, like Brett Favre came, who's and Candace Cameron Burr came, and so like just like getting to see these people who are Christians like living a regular life and kind of inspiring students to be champions for Christ. That's this whole model. So I had major culture shock going there. Like I was like, but also in a beautiful way of that longing. These people had the joy that I'd always been seeking. They had the faith that they knew the Lord, and I wanted to know the Lord. I made my first week, I made this group of friends who I'm still really good friends with. A couple of them were missionary kids growing up, and they just loved me so well. And I did my first Bible study with one of them. She like took me down to Romans Road. Do you know Romans Road? Yeah. So we read the book of Romans, and she showed me like salvation, and then I started questioning that whole "am I saved" thing.
Yeah.
And I didn't have an answer to that because I didn't have a moment when I like gave my life to Christ.
Yeah.
So that was that whole first year of trying to figure out like, am I saved?
Yeah.
Where do I fit into this? And then even in that though, I remember one of those convocations we walked in and they had these like garbage bins, or like, I don't know, like trash bins or whatever, as we were walking in, and everyone was taking something out of them. So I was like, oh great. So I like put my hand and I took it out, and it was this little cup with the cracker on top and the juice on the bottom. And I just started laughing.
Yeah.
I was like, what is this? They're like, oh, we're doing communion tonight. I'm like, this isn't communion.
Was like, this before or after COVID?
This was before COVID. Okay. This was my freshman year. Yeah, which is 2018, 2019.
Okay. Because I've seen those more during COVID, like kind of grab and go, but that's interesting that was, I mean, I guess if you have 18, 20, you know, how
thousands of people.
Like,
yeah, that's how they would do it. Yeah. And I remember that night, I was like, I'm not taking this. Like, this doesn't. So it was that kind of seed of Catholicism, that grace that I'd received as a child, to be like, this isn't quite right.
Yeah.
And I remember that as one of those kind of first moments where I was like was like, I love what my friends are teaching me, but there seems to be something not quite, this isn't quite the depth of that longing that I've been always like wanting. Yeah. And also that year, there's a Catholic church in that town called St. Thomas More Catholic Church, and they know that they're in a very Protestant area. Yeah. And so they very much seek people, and they have an incredible RCA program and all of that there. And the Monsignor that was there knew his audience, and it was just great. And I had found that they had a bus that they would take students from campus to the Catholic Church. Okay. And I have a friend, he's now in seminary in the Diocese of St. Louis. But he grew up in a similar way of me. He had his mom is Protestant, his dad's Catholic, and he kind of was like Catholic growing up, and kind of Protestant, kind of all over the place. Okay. And so we met freshman year, and we were like, well, it would be fun to like go to the Catholic Church on this bus. Yeah. And so we started going, maybe not every week, but every once in a while, we would go on this bus together and go to the Catholic Church. And yeah, so that was kind of my freshman year, is this kind of, that's when I think I would say I fell in love with Christ. But there's also still that kind of seed of Catholicism kind of starting to sprout a little bit. Yeah. Within that, like, I was falling in love with Christ, but he was like, oh, but don't forget my church. Like, just kind of over here. Like, I'm a part of it too, but he was letting me just love him through the witness of my friends. Yeah. So that was freshman year. Okay. And then sophomore year, I came back, and at this point, I'm like, all right, I'm on fire for Christ. Like, I know how this goes. I'm not like having culture shock. Like, I love the worship. I love the preaching. Like, I love the Bible. Like, I'm all for it. So what's next? Like, what's the next thing after like having a relationship with Christ? Like, what goes beyond that? And I come back sophomore year, and it's like the same thing all over again. It's like, do you have a relationship with Christ? Are you saved? And I'm like, okay, we covered this last year. Like, what's the next thing? So I start asking like, questions like, what about baptism? Like, some people are baptized as babies, some people are baptized older. Like, and I would get different answers from people. Or
like, do you need to be rebaptized?
And I was like, I don't feel like I need to be
not of course, like a Catholic would never say that, but just
right. They're like adult baptism, and I was like, I don't really feel like I need to be rebaptized. Like, I feel like good about my and I didn't know why, but I was like, I feel like I was baptized, so why am I doing this again? Yeah. And like, the communion thing, they did that again sophomore year, and I was like, this is the thing. And I'm just such a, like, I love history, I love science, like, I love the facts. And I just didn't like the fact that truth was relative even within this kind of Protestant Christianity. I'm like, that's what I feel like I was trying to escape from the world, is that you can be whatever you want, you can believe whatever you want. Like, that's just...
How did that present itself at a place like Liberty?
Yeah, and I want to be careful. Like, disclaimer, I had the best experience at Liberty. I love the people I met at Liberty. And I love the fact that I got to go receive a good education at a place where it was rooted in Christian values, and that we prayed together, that like we were encouraged to pursue our faith. Like, it was incredible. But it is this kind of conglomeration of people from a lot of different faith traditions. And so I think it just presented itself of well, you know, one person would say, yeah, you should be rebaptized, but then they're like, but baptism is just a sign of something that happened inwardly, but then so why do I need to be rebaptized again if I've already had the inward transformation? Or like, okay, you're good because you were baptized as a kid, what makes you have that moment of salvation? And I don't know, it just didn't seem completely like consistent in those sorts of things. And yeah, so that's when I think I started questioning where and I was trying to remember. I think I was going to mass sometimes my sophomore year.
Okay.
But again, there was still that element of I hadn't ever seen faith growing up. And so I was like praying every day in class. I was going to convocation twice a week. I was going to Bible study. I'm like, why do I need to go to church on Sunday too? Like that just I'm doing all the Christian things. And there was this idea of that church was about what I was doing for God. That was very much the logic that I think was I think I see in maybe a more Protestant culture is church is about, you know, we're doing something for God, we're worshiping Him. And so if I was doing stuff for God all week, so why do I have to do it again on Sunday? And I think I've learned that it's a bit of a different view than the Catholic perspective of we've been gifted so much, and so we respond.
That makes sense though, because like if you don't have the sacraments in a Protestant or an evangelical church, the way that you do have a Catholic church, it is kind of like what is the focal point? Right. You know, at an evangelical service. So that makes sense that maybe you're like, why do I need to, like you're doing all of these things to know Christ, you know, your Bible studies and prayer and everything. So yeah, that makes sense to kind of wonder about that.
Why am I doing that again on Sunday? Yeah. So I know I was going to church to mass sometimes that sophomore year because I remember I went one day and they would have like food afterwards for the students. And there was a professor there. And so I'm like, what are you doing here? He's like, oh, I'm an RCA. Like, I was Baptist growing up and I'm becoming Catholic. And I was like, why would you do that? Like, I didn't quite get why he would do such a drastic thing as a professor there. And he was just so kind and gentle and just shared a story with me. And he recommended 2 books. One was called Born Fundamentalist, Born Again Catholic by David Curry, I believe. The other one was called Four Witnesses. I can't remember the name of the author.
Oh, nice. I think I
do you have that one?
I don't know if it's in here or might be in another room. I do have that one. I think it's in the other room. I wish I could find it.
Yes, but it's about the early church fathers. It's like 4 early church fathers. And I was like, okay, like, cool, like, I'll get them, whatever. And I do think I ordered them. So I think I had the books, but I, was in school, and so I didn't read them. Then COVID hit my sophomore year. I go home. We have all this free time, like another one of those COVID stories. And I remember I started reading the books out on my, because I can remember this so vividly. I was like sitting on my parents' back porch and I'm reading, I was reading kind of both books at the same time. And I remember reading Justin Martyr's account of Christian worship from 150 AD.
Okay, yeah.
And I'm like, this is the Mass.
Yeah.
And at Liberty that year, it was this whole like desire, a lot of people were seeking this, like trying to go back to the early church. Like, what was the early church like? We need to be like the early church. Yeah. That was the whole theme at Liberty that year. And so I'm reading this and I'm like, oh no. Like the Catholics have the early church. Like this is what everyone's been seeking. Yeah. And it was this great relief and excitement because I had realized that I'd always been Catholic and I had this desire of this kind of Catholic identity within me because I knew that was like how I'd been early on. And I think I always desired that to be true. But it was because of the influence of the people I was around, like it just didn't seem possible for it to be true. And then there it was, like in the beginning, like it has always been Catholicism. COVID kind of gave me that time I was home, like I was able to go to Mass. I don't know, Mass was weird at that time. I don't know if anyone else could fully go to Mass, but like I started going like in person back home while I was there, and then started my junior year. And I don't actually remember how I approached the conversation, but I think probably talked to my campus minister and was like, hey, like I think like I never received sacrament confirmation, like I think I want to do that. And so I got signed up for RCA because realizing like I had never been catechized before, you know, so like that's one of those questions of like, if you have someone who has received the other two sacraments, do you put them in RCA? And people have different opinions and whatnot, but generally, yeah, like I wasn't catechized, I didn't know really anything about it. So I started RCA that fall. And that in itself was a crazy process.
Okay.
Because I had been baptized and received First Communion, the team was like, oh, like, well, you're Catholic, you know these things. And I'm like, no, I don't. But I didn't really know that I didn't know, and it was just this whole thing.
Maybe you didn't know what you didn't know.
I didn't know what I didn't know what I didn't know. And it was also, that's when I started being a little bit more vocal about, you know, this process I was going through. And I remember a professor saying to me, like, you know, Catholic theology is just totally wrong, just completely wrong. Or I had a friend who didn't know at that time that I was going through RCA, and we were in I actually took a Protestant Reformation class, like history class, when I was there. And he like sat down next to me one day and he was like, I don't remember exactly what he said, but it was something like, I just can't believe these Catholics and what they say about Mary. And I'm like, I'm not offended, but I want you to know before you feel like you're offending me that I'm becoming Catholic. Like, just so you know. And he's like, oh dear. And so there was just this kind of weird social transition that I had to go through. And again, with my own identity of like, okay, how do I fit into this culture that had shaped me and formed me and brought me to Jesus?
Right.
Like, without these friends and this culture of Christianity, like I wouldn't even know Christ as my Lord. And like, what a gift they've given me.
Yeah.
And now I'm saying that, like, they're wrong, or like it's not enough. Like, that was really hard. And like getting closer and closer and closer to the like Easter Vigil, like I just felt that weight a lot more. And it's definitely very internal because I didn't have anyone to like share this with either. Like, and if I showed any sign of doubt or questions, like my friends would be like, see, like you should, like, you know, so like just kind of like, like I'm Catholic, and I'm like, what, like this seems like I'm just ruining my whole life.
So was there anyone else in RCIA from Liberty, or?
There was one other girl, and she was lovely, but we just weren't like,
okay,
super close friends. And there was this family that was going through it together, and actually after RCIA, I got pretty close with them, but when we were in the process, I don't know why, we just never connected when we were in classes and whatnot. But it was like a son and his dad, and then the son's wife, and the dad was just so anti-Catholic, but in RCA. Like, I think he was kind of, maybe now I'm thinking about it, like wanting it to be true, but struggling or wanting it to not be true, but knowing that it was true, maybe.
Yeah.
And I think watching him, we had a retreat right before like a couple weeks before Easter. And during the retreat, it was like a 180, I feel like. And all of a sudden, he was just like, just in awe and gratitude of the Catholic faith. And I was like, if he can do it, I can do it.
Wow, that's
I never actually told him that. I should probably tell him that. And then that kind of story of doubt, I think, like the thread of doubt kind of came back up too, of like, again, if I know Jesus, like why the church, or is this really worth it enough to like throw my whole life out, is kind of what it was feeling like.
Yeah.
That doubt of, God, are you even real? And why am I then throwing out everything I know in this culture, this college culture, this college life that I'm in, like, for you, if you're not even real?
Yeah.
But I went through with it, and I received the sacrament, and like, I have not doubted the reality of God since then. Like, whenever I talk to confirmation students now, and like, or we talk about the graces of confirmation, I'm like, yes. Like, there are such graces in the sacrament, because I cannot tell you how much I doubted God beforehand, and like after receiving that, like, it has never been a question in my mind that like, God, if God is real, like, it was just this complete switch. And so I received the sacrament, and it's like, so I feel like those first 2 years I fell in love with Christ, and then I kind of re-fell in love with him through his church.
That's awesome. So then that was towards the end of your junior year at Liberty?
Yes, my junior, yeah.
Okay.
Exactly, yeah.
So what was your senior year like?
So, that summer I stayed in Lynchburg, and then that fall I got pretty involved in that Catholic church there, and it was just so neat to be a part of that community, and to begin to have, I actually would go to Mass in the morning on Sunday, and then I would go to a different Protestant church. And I would make this very clear. I'm like, I'm not questioning. Like, I have gone through a journey. Like, I know what I believe now. But I realized that I had this love of, like, dialogue and conversation and trying to better understand what other people believe. Because I think so many people were like, well, why do you worship Mary, or whatever other question. And I'm like, we don't worship Mary. Like, there's so many misconceptions about Catholicism. Like, what misconceptions are there that are causing so much friction between these two groups that we can't, like, understand each other? And so that kind of took up that first half of my senior year, is like desiring that dialogue. And then the spring of my senior year, I actually graduated half a semester early, and is it the kitty?
Yeah, Chester's. Is that Chester?
She's so cute. And I did a 5.5 month through hike of the Appalachian Trail.
Oh, cool.
So I started in March and I hiked through August, and from the grace of God and the the generosity of so many people, I was able to go to Mass every week while I was on trail.
Oh, cool.
And I think that was very much the beginning of, like, a life of walking with God, like, quite literally. That was, like, the beginning of what I really kind of feel like is, like, my catechesis with the Lord, is, like, he gave me this time to just walk with him and pray with him and to live his life and to live as, like, kind of like the disciples lived, like, just with everything they needed on their back and their own 2 feet, and to, like, travel through all these different communities and, be taken care of, and to share faith and, like, hi, kitty cat, and, like, what God's been doing in my life, and to bear witness, like, to their stories as well. So that, I think, I think that very much has shaped my spirituality, because that was my kind of, like, my neophyte year, like, my first year, even though, like, obviously I'd been baptized and whatnot, but, like, that was my first year as, like, a full Catholic, to be able to, like, have that experience of walking with the Lord.
What were some of the questions that people would ask you when they were like, wait, what, you're Catholic? What were people's reactions like?
Like, my, like, Protestant friends, or just people in general, or
just, like, Protestant friends, or just, you know, people in that community. What did they kind of think of?
I think there is just this general why question. Like, why be Catholic if you already know the Lord? Like, why do you need all that extra stuff? I feel like that was the biggest question. Because I don't think there was ever this questioning of, like, my salvation or my faith, because I think they saw my love of the Lord. But I think it was like, why all that?
What would you say to them
stuff?
When they were like, why do you need all that stuff?
I think it would depend on the person. I mean, an image that I think helped me in that process was, like, you have 2 glasses of water. One is, like, half full and the other one is completely full. It's like, neither of them are bad. But of course, if you're really thirsty, you want, like, the full one. And so, like, and kind of helping, and again, my catechesis wasn't all that good, so I don't think I necessarily articulated it well in the time, but helping them understand that it's not all this extra fluffy, frilly stuff. This is the church that the Lord started, like, and kind of getting to know the Bible well, to be able, because Protestants really like the Bible, and so to be able to point to some of those things within Scripture of, like, this isn't stuff that we just added, and, like, you know, look at 150 AD and what was said then. Like, this is part of how Christianity has always been. It's not something that's been added later. I remember in that Protestant Reformation class when my professor was actually handled it so incredibly, because I was in the class and there was also another student who was in the process of becoming Orthodox. And so my professor would allow both of us to kind of speak from that perspective.
Oh, cool.
And he did a wonderful job of it. But at the end of the year, you know, he's talking about some of the theological differences, and people would laugh when he would explain the Catholic stuff. And I'm sitting there like, you guys know, like, we've been over this. He's like, you know that I'm Catholic. Can you not laugh in my presence? But that's fine. But I remember there was just one guy in the class who, like, would kind of laugh or chuckle, but then he'd raise his hand and have these really beautiful questions. I remember going up to him one day and just, like, we were talking about Mary that day. And I was like, I just want you to know that, like, I'm not saying you need to, like, look into this or whatever, like, I don't know where you're at, but, like, I want you to know that we do truly have biblical reasons for believing what we do about Mary. Like, I just want you to know that. And he was like, I am so glad you're in this class, because I feel like I always saw Catholics of this way of, like, they don't have a faith, they don't care about Jesus. And, like, you have, like, completely changed how I view Catholics. Like you're a positive image now of Catholicism to me. I'm like, oh, okay. It's a lot of pressure, but thanks.
What a gift that you were there. Like, I feel like so many people just haven't met Catholics,
right?
So they have this idea of like a very lukewarm Catholic who doesn't love Jesus or know Jesus. So that's really a grace in their lives that they got to have you there.
And that's so like to answer your question, I think that's what I would really try to start with is like I love Jesus. Like that's what has drawn me to Catholicism is like his church, his body, and like we get to receive him sacramentally. Like we get to receive him in the Eucharist. Like if you love Jesus, like I get to literally like be that close to him.
Yeah.
And so like I would want them to know that first. And then kind of see where they were at and answer their questions, which were often just misconceptions.
Yeah.
So
yeah, nice. And then so you graduated at Liberty, and then what have you been up to since then?
Yeah, so I did the through hike, and then I knew actually when I was still at Liberty, my senior year is when I found the program I'm in now. So I'm in a master's in theology at the University of Notre Dame, and it's a whole human formation program. So it's not just studying theology academically. It's really trying to bridge the gap between an academic theology and the realities of parish life and the realities of being a human person.
That's cool.
And I found that to be really attractive, and realizing, again, I hadn't really been ever around Catholics before. Even that small community, that church community in Virginia, there weren't all that many young people, and, I knew that I wanted, Catholicism is something you have to experience and be a part of. Like, you can't just read about it, and you can't just pray on your own. You have to be a part of a community.
Yeah, for sure.
And so that's why I was really drawn to this program. It's like, okay, I want to study theology. I want to catechize myself, but I also want to be formed, and I want to serve. And that's what this program has allowed me to do. So that's really what I've been doing since, is studying theology, learning how to have a Catholic prayer life, and then getting to be a part of this incredible parish that we're in here in Falmouth, and serving kind of as I learn. I realize I'm kind of catechizing as I'm being catechized in a way. But I think there's great joy in that, and I think that's allowed me to bring maybe excitement to my work of, this isn't just old stuff that I've known for a long time. It's like I'm learning it, and then I'm getting to share it. What a great way to learn and make it a part of who I am. So,
what has been your experience of Catholic prayer versus more of the evangelical?
Oh man,
style.
I feel like there's so many ways to take this.
Or what's your favorite way? What are your go-tos? Do you like the rosary? Do you like the breviary? What are you contemplative?
Yeah, I did not know Liturgy of the Hours really before, and I love night prayer. I love the communal aspect of it. Even when you're praying on your own, you know that you're praying with the universal church.
Yeah.
That's such a gift. The rosary became really important to me during my hike, getting to just kind of walk with Jesus through the different steps of his life. But I love the more that I've learned about prayer in a academic theology sense. It's all about union with God and relationship with God. That's what prayer is. And it's been really beautiful to think back about how prayer was explained to me in an evangelical context of that kind of relationship with God. Yeah. And it's helping me realize that, again, that depth that I was always looking for. That I think sometimes the rosary or the breviary or whatever seem as if they're just rote prayers. Yeah. It's no, these are the tools that bring us from, yes, we have this desire for relationship to God. These meditations bring us, open our capacity to truly be united with God in and through his church. Yeah. Not through our work, but through the work of Christ and what he does through his body. And so I think in this academic study, I almost have the same image of prayer that I had as an evangelical, in that evangelical mindset of just relationship with God. Yeah. It has this richness to it now. Yeah. Of union with Christ, and that union is real. It's not, and it's not even just spiritually. It's Christ wants to become a part of us. That's what the Eucharist shows us. Yeah. And that's what prayer is about. So it's just been this deepening of all those things.
I heard someone say that anything good within Protestantism, evangelicalism, you can find it in the Catholic Church.
Absolutely. That's what I love about it. It's so, we were talking about how the kind of truth is relative thing. It's in Catholicism we have the diversity, like
Yeah.
unity and diversity.
Yeah.
And that we do have the oneness of the Eucharist. Like
Yeah.
we are one in Christ, we are part of his body. Like, oh.
Yeah.
And yet we can be so diverse.
Yeah.
Like that I just think is so cool.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Are there any other things that you would say are like, I normally ask people like, what are the graces that you've experienced since, and in your case you were again baptized Catholic as a baby, and then were confirmed as an adult. Are there any other things that you can kind of like see in your life as a grace since becoming confirmed, or being confirmed?
Yeah. I think that, I don't remember who this image is originally from, but it's hopefully, I'm sure you've heard it. It's like you're at the top of a mountain and there's kids playing and there's cliffs on all sides, and like they're gonna be afraid of falling off, and so they're gonna stay in the middle. But if you put a fence up, then they have freedom to play in that whole area without fearing like falling off the cliff. It's put way more beautifully by the original source, but I think that very much expresses the grace that I've been given in Catholicism, of this, and I remember that was almost the relief of that day when I was on my parents' porch. Like, I don't need to figure this out anymore. Like,
Yeah.
I can give over to the authority of the church.
Yeah.
And have great freedom there.
Yeah, and then you've got,
rest.
okay, yeah, that makes sense with that analogy.
Yeah,
I
yeah.
have like, yeah.
I have the structure, like, and it's there, and like Christ has given us a structure.
Yeah.
And these kind of limits, or this thing in which to move.
Yep.
And it's not about me to figure out how far I can go, or like, you know, it's been given to me, and so I can just be a child and play within the structure of the church.
Right. There's like an like when you have obedience, that gives you freedom. Whereas if there are no guardrails, that feels like freedom, but it's really not.
It's not. Yeah. And I think that even like in reading the Bible, I think in reading the Bible in that kind of Protestant context and mindset, it was kind of always this, what does this mean? I have to study this theologically. I have to figure out what Christ is saying, so that, like, okay, what is he saying about baptism? Like, what are the rules? What are the dogmas? What has been given to us? How do I making sure I believe rightly? And now I can read scripture and just read the word and be with Christ in his word, and I don't have to analyze it.
Yeah.
That work has been done for me.
Yeah.
And I can trust that authority. I can trust the goodness of it because it was given to us by Christ and has proven itself all this time. So yeah, I think just this great joy in freedom. That it's not about me to figure out.
Yeah.
Like, I'm not smart enough anyway.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
That's awesome. Well, what advice would you give to someone who's maybe baptized Catholic but has never really explored Catholicism? What advice would you give to them, or what would you say they should start with, or what would you say to them?
I know it's such a unique thing, especially I know for your kind of channel of like you interview a lot of converts, and I know I'm not quite a convert, but but
so many people I think are in your shoes.
I believe there's a huge group of people who are in that area, and oh man, like I guess it does matter to be Catholic, to realize that you've been given this incredible grace that like people like yourself like sacrificed and went through a lot to receive as an adult. You've been given this gift of being called by Christ and to be claimed by him. And you don't need to do that alone. Like, that's the whole point of the church, is that there's a community that desires for you to be a part of it. Like, you already are a part of it, and they want to welcome you into that. I think so many of us in this kind of modern context are seeking a narrative, we're seeking a community, we're seeking an identity, a place to belong. And that's what our faith has given us. I am able to know my identity in Christ and in this community. And I can go to any Catholic church in this entire world and know that I belong. And I think that's a great antidote to a lot of the loneliness and fear and uncertainty and questions that everyone is experiencing today. That I have a home in every country in this world, and in Christ and the Eucharist. So yeah, I guess like lean into that grace, that power that you've been given. It matters to be Catholic, and there's so much beauty here, and there's an answer to whatever your question is.
Yeah.
And there's a person in any Catholic church that struggled with whatever you struggled with, and just to keep pushing into those questions, not be afraid of those questions, because like the answer is there, and it's going to give you so much peace and so much freedom if you open yourself to it. So
Yeah.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
And like no matter whatever you've done, like no matter whatever you've done or whatever lifestyle you've lived, like that should not hold you back. And like you don't need to have it all figured out before you walk through those doors again.
Yeah.
And start asking the questions. So
beautiful. You've sold me.
Great.
I'm ready to become just kidding. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being willing to share your story, and I think it will be an encouragement to everyone who hears it. So thank you so much.
Thanks for listening.
Yeah,
It's
absolutely.
fun to think about. So yeah.
Well, thank you. Well, thanks everyone for watching, and yeah, thanks so much.